All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to Srijan Wednesday webinars. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is a community initiative by Srijan Technologies where you can tune into a variety of sessions across the fields of technology, entrepreneurship, and community building. In today's session, we're joined by Brian Ollendijk, lead Drupal developer on the ELMS Learning Network project. In this session, Brian's ready to share with us the challenges his teams faced with the Drupal theme layer and how web components helped resolve them. Brian and his team can't stop talking about web components and Polymer, and right now let's check out what makes them exciting. But before we begin, I'd request all participants to please type in any questions that you have during the presentation, and we'll take them up in the last 15 minutes of this session. Also, please don't forget to take this conversation live on Twitter using our hashtag SrijanWW. That's SRIJANWW. You can share your thoughts by tagging us in your tweets using our handle @Srijan. That's @SRIJAN. So I hope we're all set. Let's get right to it. Brian, over to you.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you for hosting me today. I'd like to talk to you all about, as mentioned, web components, Polymer, and what I call aligning Drupal's destiny. So Drupal's been really kind of get off the island mentality the last several years, and this is kind of one of those places we got off the island. And so to understand a little bit of the context of why, how we stumbled upon this, you need to know what it is we do. So you may have heard of a project called ELMS or ELMS Learning Network. You can find out more about it at elmsln.org. It's a project sponsored out of Penn State, where I work in the College of Arts and Architecture's Office of Digital Learning. It's actually a collaboration of several groups now. So there's three primary groups within Penn State that are contributing developers and instructional designers, graphic artists, things like that to the project. But the biggest question to get is, what the heck is it? Because you've been working on it for like 5 years. So ELMS LN is effectively, it's not a traditional learning management system. It's more that we get a big idea, no matter what the big idea is. And anytime we get a big idea, we're going to stuff that at a new domain. Now, this seems like a rather simple concept, that we get an idea and we put it someplace, but it's a fundamentally different way of approaching the development of a system. We're basically building these interconnections between types of systems and application purposes. So, for example, if we're primarily presenting content to people, this might be at a courses.institution.edu/course name type of an address. So this is a Drupal site that's delivering content. We have users that have access to it. But then let's say, in a traditional LMS, we might say, hey, we want students to blog. Well, then we would take a lot of effort and time. We'd just cramble that functionality in here and be like, hey, it's a course. But what we do is we would create a new domain. So in this case, we might get blogs.institution/course. And so we have these consistent pathways between the applications, a consistent look and feel. We're using Drupal for all different aspects of it. Technically, there's a lot of different Drupal sites powering the experience. So this core architecture took a long time to build originally, but now it lets us leverage it to do all kinds of things. So then we can make a discussion forum system using this methodology. Or we can roll out a studio system, which if any of you were in the arts or arts education, it's a studio practice kind of, I go into a classroom, everybody's painting or sculpting or doing their work, and then, faculty member might stop everyone and say, hey, let's check out so-and-so's work, and we all kind of have an open critique process. So trying to simulate that online is radically different from like what a content system would provide. So ELMS is actually one of the only systems that's among this white paper described construct of NGDLE, which stands for Next Generation Digital Learning Environment. So it's kind of, if you've ever had experience with a learning management system or a training system, it's kind of how organizations stitch everything else that they do to deliver that material into one bucket. So we do integrate with learning management systems, but then it's kind of taking it beyond just traditional learning management systems. A lot of times things like Experience API come up, or web services in general. You could think of a rudimentary NGDLE as being any training system that then has a YouTube video, right? And if you're tracking progression through a YouTube video or the analytics of that YouTube video, you are technically in this NGDLE worldview by using a system other than the video provider platform. So why do I frame all this? Well, we get into weird stuff. We get into some futuristic tech. We get to basically pay to experiment and build the things that educate future students. So we get to find neat stuff and just explore it and take it to the nth degree. And so one of those things that, those islands that we traveled to is in front. We worked in Angular for a while. We were trying to decide between Angular and React, and we really weren't liking the development paradigms without Drupal, quite frankly. And so around February, after a long night at Drupal Camp, New Jersey, we came across this. So a couple of front-end people on our team had been bothering me to look into web components and Polymer because Polymer 2.0 was about to be released. And so I finally said, okay, I need to pay attention to what you're talking about. Let's look into this. And so Polymer is a project out of Google that is kind of a thin layer on top of something called web components that allows you to build components more quickly. So what is a web component? Well, a web component is actually a 4-part standard. It's kind of a meta specification. So there's these 4 standards of the browser. There's templates, custom elements, shadow DOM, and imports. And any browser that implements these 4 things technically implements what is known as web components. Now, a web component may sound similar to Pattern Lab. You'll hear a lot about component architecture, and Pattern Lab is really big right now in the Drupal community. But this is not Pattern Lab. Now, you interface with it in similar ways. You think of things as far as, atomic design is a really good structure to follow, but it's not actually Pattern Lab. It's also not Angular or React, although web components are technically compatible with them. So let's look at what is a web component through a silly example, because that's the best way to learn anything. So let's say that you wanted an awesome explosion. Now, forever in the web, if I said, hey, let's go put an awesome explosion, you would go find some awesome GeoCities GIF, and then you would write a bracket, img src equals, and you would point to that GeoCities GIF, and then you'd give it alt data, hopefully, to make it accessible. And then you'd have an awesome explosion. But maybe you wanted to color shift that. Okay, so you write a whole bunch of CSS. All right, maybe you want to make it bigger. Okay, well, you need to know height and width. And that's all well and good for anyone watching this that understands any of those concepts. But I can't give that to someone that doesn't know advanced HTML. All right, so I can't kind of democratize the design and the development process because of the limitations of needing to understand that code. However, if I told you, hey, I want you to put an awesome explosion on the page, and I said, if you copy and paste this, you're going to get an awesome explosion every time. That's democratized, right? That's a lower barrier to entry to this knowledge. So let's extend that model then. We don't just want an awesome explosion. Let's say we have a property for an awesome explosion as far as size. So we can make tiny explosions or small or big or epic. Obviously, I favor epic explosions. Who doesn't? But that now we're expressing what would relate to CSS concepts most likely, right? As far as width and height, but we're not having to say 200 px or 45 rems or anything like that. To our question of colors, let's say that we wanted to be able to color shift that, right? So that we can maybe have, hey, I want an awesome explosion that's purple and it just be purple. Well, then let's combine those, right? So then we have an awesome explosion that's big and it's red. And that's extremely readable for our end users. I could send this to a lot of different people, either in design land or development land, and they would know, hey, we're talking about an awesome explosion that's big and red. And they could write that tag. They could put that tag into all kinds of places. So effectively, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about web components, is building our own language for construction of HTML. If you go to webcomponents.org, there's a lot of other people building these kinds of constructions of the web, and building their own Lego bricks and giving them away. So obviously there's a ton of things from Google that are out there right now. There's over 1,000, like 1,050 elements at this point, and not all of them are incredibly useful or usable, but there's a ton of ones that are. So as a less silly example, let's look at something everyone has probably put on a web page, a checkbox. So there's a ton of different accessibility considerations with a single checkbox on a page. As far as communicating to a screen reader, hey, this is a checkbox and this is the label. As far as handling tap type of, when you're on a phone, it's different from focus, it's different from a hover event. So what if we made an element that embodied all of those? And then instead of using input type equals checkbox, checked equals true, what have you, we could just put paper checkbox and know that we get something that looks like the material design spec that I can tap, and it does that little cool paper ripple badoop, and it's highly accessible, and it works great on mobile, and it's fast. Maybe it's even responsive. Maybe it has a label that appears only when you hover it, and it's the same label as is presented to a screen reader, whatever it is, that we could boil that down to a single element. So what uses web components though? Because we're talking about customized HTML. There's got to be some hiccup. The spec was actually proposed in, I believe, 2013. So 4 years now, and you probably haven't heard of this before, or at least I hadn't ever heard of it being used by anyone. Well, if you've seen the new version of Google Earth that went from being a desktop app to being a progressive web app effectively, this is built in Polymer with web components. Now, Google Earth does some cheating. It only works in Chrome. It's basically processing C code on the fly is how it's doing its 3D visualization and stuff. So it's a little out there. It's not entirely Google eating their own dog food. They have a hashtag for Polymer and says use the platform, and then they roll out stuff like this, and it sort of uses the platform. But youtube.com/new is them really eating their own dog food on this. So if you go to youtube.com/new in any modern browser, it doesn't work on mobile yet, it'll ask, hey, you can check out the preview, if you will. And so what you'll see is extremely similar to normal YouTube, and that's kind of the point, actually. So as they're kind of in beta with it, but if you right click and inspect, you start to see these tags all over the place, like YTD browse, YTD history manager, app drawer, all the elements that they're putting in there. And so day one, when you make this conversion to web components, probably not a huge deal. You'll start messing with them and be like, oh, okay, this is pretty neat, but this doesn't change my world. However, imagine if Google now wants to embed your history of videos that you watched anywhere within their ecosystem, or you want to put it as a developer on a third-party site and say, hey, you may also that's a single tag now, and integration is a single reference to a single file. And so you could immediately start to see how you can start constructing and repurposing your Lego bricks that you're building out over the life cycle of every application, every website that you ever do. So another thing loaded with web components is ELMS, which is why I mentioned it before. So every button on our interface is now a web component. This little icon here is generated based on a hash value. That's a web component. So we're buying in pretty hard on this. So everything in our universe going forward, in fact, we pretty much do all of our work in Polymer now, and then we wire it up to Drupal later. So it's a simple example of kind of a component for education. We've got this LRN design drawer. So we've got a lot of these tags that are kind of LRN focused. And so if I were to hover over this element, that I might get a nice little circle to indicate that it's something can be clicked on. I could tap to it, it has the same interaction experience. But then if I want to implement a flyout, I've now effectively just placed some text inside of a tag. And so now that when you would click it, you say, hey, this is some help text. So let's look at what goes into a web component for this example. And so you can see it's this huge thing. Everybody gets it, right? Sweet. No, so let's zoom in on some of these. So effectively, a web component boils back to a single HTML file. And typically you're going to see the name of the element.html. So in this case, lrndesign-drawer.html. Now, much like normal HTML elements, these custom elements can reference other custom elements. So the way that we do this is via the imports part of the specification, in which we're importing things like Polymer, which is just this lightweight kind of shim above the browser so that we can do different data bindings between elements and things. But I can reference a layout tag, I can reference icons, I can reference tooltips, I can reference whatever I want. And these are elements I grab from webcomponents.org. Right now they use Bowers or package manager, so you can install them that way to build your other elements out. Then every element is going to have this DOM-module ID equals, and this is effectively registering with the browser, hey, if you see the tag lrndesign-drawer, I need you to basically just inject everything you find below it. It's kind of an easy way to think of it. Then you're going to see a style section, so you can just put in CSS. Cool thing about this is all CSS styles are then scoped very local to the item. And so every item is bringing in its own CSS, its own JavaScript, and its own HTML, more or less, for custom element structure. So you get things styled in a vacuum that then look the correct way after the fact. You don't really have these global pervasive styles that are influencing everything. Oh shoot, we forgot to namespace this correctly. From styles, then we get into the structure, kind of the HTML, you will, of this. So in this example, this is that flyout. There's this thing called app header, and it's got a drawer, which is what does the open and close. Hacks, I'm not going to talk about at the moment. And then there's a paper icon button. So that has our icon that we click on. In the case before, it was a little network icon, and a tooltip so that if we hover it, it shows like what our alt data is. You may notice these curly braces. This is something a convenience Polymer is providing, and so this allows you to do two-way data binding between elements. This is effectively how you get properties to propagate down. So in that higher level tag, I said, okay, well, icon equals network. Well, then because inside the tag it has this two-way data binding via Polymer, now network gets passed down into here, and then paper icon button might do something with that to pass it down into something else. You can kind of see how you could send data properties between elements to, get styling the way that you want it, to get different data from point A to point B. After that, we get into, this is a Polymer 1 element, so you actually see the word Polymer. In Polymer 2, you write them a little differently. It's not so drastic that it's unreadable, it's closer to the browser. It's kind of their use the platform hashtag, if you will. But you see here I have the properties defined. And so we have, a state, whether this is opened or not, what the icon is, what the alignment of it is, if it should fly out from the left or the right, and some alt text. From there, it's JavaScript, right? So you can have events that fire, you can have observers, you can, you have a ready state. If you're familiar with jQuery where things say they're ready, you kind of have a ready state for this item. Polymer also provides some kind of sugar styling, if you will. So you can see like you can do things like $$ and then, hey, give me paper icon button. So I could, and then the neat thing is this is kind of within just the scope of what you're looking at in this one element. So I can know that this element's going to kind of bring itself up. It's going to put down all the HTML and CSS to make it look the right way. And then all the JavaScript is just specific to that element. So there could be a dozen of these on the page. They're only going to handle click events to go, oh, I'm going to toggle the state of opened on this specific thing. So what's the cons of this approach? There's got to be a holdback, right? Well, it has to do with browser support. So you're not using Netscape Navigator 3.0, sorry. Nobody is. But you're also not using old versions of IE. And a lot of people are really happy about that, quite frankly. But you can get IE 11 and Edge to render these things. If you notice in one of the earlier slides, it was actually a polyfill slide showing what uses a polyfill, which is JavaScript kind of filling in the gaps in a browser versus what's natively supported. And so all of these things are supported in anything modern. You have pretty much anything that's come out in the last like 3-4 years. There's at least a polyfill to load it. So with the polyfills, they're not going to be brilliant performance, but they're still going to work. So people will get the page correctly. what are the pros of this approach? We get separation of concerns, right? I have that one element and I know exactly what it's in charge of. You can do headless theming very easily via this. We're showing some examples. So we basically build out all of our styling and things as individual elements, and then we make Drupal or whatever system aware of them. You get unidirectional data flow. So that's like the properties being passed down via the two-way data binding. I might have an event that bubbles up to send, hey, someone clicked on this thing. Does anyone want to respond to it? It's component driven, which if you've done anything with Pattern Lab, you know it's a really great mental model to work with. And there's also built-in design documentation, which is pretty awesome. So that little site from before that showed the description of what an LRN design panel is, that just happens as you're building the element. So the Polymer tooling is really slick, and it's kind of as you're building the element, you get documentation as to how to use it, which you can then easily communicate to designers and developers. And then that last one with the gasp emoji, which is framework interoperability. Right, so that gets a big gasp emoji because that's a really big deal. So framework interoperability means that we can use these single components anywhere, right? These HTML components will work on anything that has knowledge of what the definition is. And so it kind of unlocks us from all of these frameworks. We're not going and getting the, drawer flyout module for Drupal, right? We have an element that knows how to handle drawer flyouts, and then we just, in our template files, we can just hollow them out and effectively have, hey, here's the content that should be in the drawer, and here's the title of the drawer, and that might be delivered from a node, TPL file or what have you. It also makes it so that you're styling and theming, agnostic of Drupal version as well. So technically, it'd be pretty easy to backport some of the work we've done and make it show up in Drupal 6 or Drupal 5, because it's not specific to Drupal anymore, right? You don't have to then go learn Twig to engage with this, to go from 7 to 8 kind of a thing. And then also gasp emoji on WordPress, again, it's you're writing for the browser and the web in general, so then all of these can work together. And so in this, if you're interested in the components that we've been specifically working on, we've got all these things called LRNs. And so LRNs are these web components for education. And so since they would work anywhere, our idea is that we can start to get other systems into the boat and say, oh, well, we have to communicate about assignments, or we have to build comments and discussion board systems. Well, if we can all agree upon like, wow, that looks like a really nice, comment, then I can use your comment styling and I can just pass properties into it and away I go. So where did Drupal go? If any of you know me, I've been, kind of pushing Drupal and been very active in community for 12 years now, and I barely mentioned the word Drupal in the last 39 slides here. Well, no, we're not using Drupal. It's just kind of shifted to its place in the stack. And the reason that we've been able to get away from Drupal so significantly in our development efforts is because we wrote a bridge module. And so we wrote a web components module that has a whole bunch of different integration points. But basically, we're trying to make it so you can just drop your Polymer your Polymer elements into a directory, and Drupal be aware of them, and then you start to use them. And so it's not pure headless, although you can get into headless, and it's not pure template-driven theming. It's kind of that we can get into this hybrid mode that Dries talked about at DrupalCon Baltimore, where it's a mix of headless theming and it's a mix of views delivering things. It's a mix of traditional TPLs. It's just kind of whatever makes the most sense at that point in time. So let's look at what the Web Components module for Drupal does. So let's take an example of you need to make a hero banner image for a homepage. Maybe you're making a slider because still people request sliders for no reason, right? So traditionally you'd go and you'd make a template file, you'd put it in there, you'd mock it up, you'd try to wire it up to Drupal's node system or maybe the file entity system, and there's a lot of confusion on your team. Just going to say it's going to happen most likely because you need front-end people that really kind of understand Drupal enough to interface with templating and TPL systems and things like that. So let's throw out that approach because we don't work that way anymore. So how would we do this with web components? Well, we would make a ELMS LN-hero web component, and that would be the perfect representation of a banner image that has, text on it. And so we'd make an element. It would be ELMS LN-hero.html. We'd register it with the browser. We would import some definitions, right? So we pull in this iron image so we can leverage past work to do, loading as we scroll to it and fade ins once an image is in place. We can then do two-way data binding to pass down from our tag into these other tags as we need it. We can define our properties. Say, hey, hero has a title and an image and a URL and a date posted. And then we can use some CSS and we can style that. And so when we do all that, we get this awesome little documentation site. As I mentioned, it shows an example. Hey, here's what you would copy and paste, and here's what the properties are in case you need some more details. And so this now becomes something that the design team can give to the development team and say, hey, here's this element. But we went a step further than that even. So what we would do to get this integrated is you place it in scope of Drupal. And so in scope of Drupal to me means in this case, in our library/webcomponents/Polymer directory, we can throw those .html files basically, and then turning on different parts of the web components module, Drupal will go, oh, I know to look for that and register it with Drupal. And so there's a couple different modules in here. There's core support for web components. Then there's Polymer support, because we didn't want to just say you have to use Polymer, although Polymer makes life a lot easier than just writing them by hand. Then there's display mode integration and display suite integration and WYSIWYG templates. What display mode integration gets you is for every element that Drupal discovers that has properties, it'll create available display mode to nodes and other entity types. Similar with display suite, it'll create a display suite mode per component it finds. And WYSIWYG templates basically just makes a template that has the example content. That's kind of the least useful, quite frankly, of them all, but we still do have that there. So then what you get is, as far as now we get into how Drupal interfaces with this. Well, Drupal reads off the ELMS LN-hero element and says, oh, there's an image property and a title and a post and a URL. And so then I'd go to my node, in this case, an article, and I would say manage display, and I'd switch over to ELMS LN-hero. And then I can basically just drag the fields up. I'm starting to wire Drupal up to the component. Awesome thing about this is that was driven entirely by the front end, right? Defining, hey, here's how we make a hero image. And so then it's just about putting these attributes in the right place. Well, let's say I want to make a view. Okay, well, to style that view then, I would just have a view that kicks out as the display mode of ELMS LN-hero. So then all the images are going to get routed through a view, or queried from views, routed through the display mode for the web component, and then it's going to write the correct tag dependencies to put the web component on the page. So effectively, I've themed Drupal with no template files, right? My component is just there as a standalone thing. Drupal has basically said, hey, I know about this tag called ELMS LN-hero. I'm going to put it on the interface. Then I'm going to align my properties with its properties. And so it's basically just writing a single HTML tag. So then you've got this entire process. It's completely disconnected from Drupal, and we've kind of wired it in at the last minute. So that's all well and good. But the thing I'm really the most excited about is this other submodule that I didn't mention at all. And so this one is one-page app. And so the one-page app integration starts to get into routing capabilities as well. So let's watch a very quick demonstration of a one-page app we're working on called the Open Studio. So the Open Studio is effectively a grid of cards, and this is presenting student work. In this case, it's fake work, obviously. And so I can see that it's got pop-ups. It tells me how many comments are left. It shows me the media that was submitted, and people can click around through it, right? So lots of different UI components. This is would be a rather complex query and probably a lot of different modules to produce this page. So how do we do this as a single tag? So we take our app and we place it again in scope of Drupal. So we've built this app as a standalone. In this case, we've got LRN app -open -studio. And the reason there's hyphens in this is actually part of the HTML specification for custom elements. Anything that's delivered by the browser itself, like a div tag, right? There's no hyphens. If it sees a hyphen, it knows it's a user-defined tag. It's just an easier way to do that. So I'm going to take this again. I would build it completely in a vacuum. Doesn't know about it. And then I'm going to drop it in scope. In this case, it's a module in a apps directory, and then I just place it in there, a whole folder. And so then to wire it up to Drupal, I'm going to modify the manifest.json file. And in there, I've got this app integration part. And so I'm going to say, hey, the title is Open Studio, menu is going to be this. So this is a Drupal menu system thing, weight position 10. I'm going to maybe put in some endpoints, right? So I need to get data in and out of this component. And context is not the Drupal connotation of context. This is more so like, hey, just so you're aware downstream, this is where this came from. Now, what this is Drupal's going to do, a dev module, is it's going to create a menu path that's apps/app name. So in this case, LRN app -open -studio. It's going to then add to the menu system an item called Open Studio, which relates to Open Studio, and then in the menu system right there. And then what that's doing is effectively is writing that one tag down. But the other thing it's doing is it's going to actually feed this data from Drupal. So it's creating this routing of data from Drupal to the component. So in this case, it's got this source path. You see source path is, in this case, sing100 apps, LRN app open studio /data, and then a token. So it's CSRF protected. It's kind of got security baked in. Well, that source path part comes from the fact there's an endpoint saying, hey, the property to write this in is source path, and I need you to make a /data path. From there, it's going to say, all right, well, this is the function that's going to return the information you want. And so that's just going to return JSON. Now, how the app knows to talk to Drupal in this case, right? It's a rather complex transaction, is this tag that kind of changed my entire worldview of web development, is the Iron Ajax tag. And so Iron Ajax is basically just a glorified wrapper around making an Ajax call or XHR call, whatever you want to call it. But with Polymer, you can then do two-way data binding. So if you imagine that you have an HTML element you put down that is saying, oh, well, I need to go talk to a URL, in this case, source path, and I need to return JSON, and then take whatever I found that I've deserialized into JSON into an array or object structure, and I need to put it into submissions. And so then, using two-way data binding, you could pass submissions being updated to the rest of your Polymer application, your custom element. And so something else Polymer gets used, you have template DOM ifs, you have if statements, you have repeat statements. And so this is saying if there are submissions, so that this AJAX file needs some submissions to write, then we have, hey, loop through the items you find and print this tag. And so this allows me to effectively wire up my headless application to a data source. Now, before we get to Drupal, we'll probably have like a example.json data file that we read off of, and we can then make sure it looks correct. That also gives us some nice templating capabilities to say like, hey, development team, I need these properties for this app to make sense. Then on Drupal side, right, if we look at what that Ajax path is returning, we get our data. And so then that's how the app kind of goes from there and does its thing to get the UX we want. It's also, to get its data in that JSON format, it's auto loading within the app. You see there's an LRN app -open -studio.php. And so this allows us to automatically discover a file that might have all the functionality we need to just run this. So looking at that callback function, we have CLE Open Studio app. We've got, hey, this has some parameters and some routing in place. And so from there, we do whatever we want, right? This is the callback for apps Open Studio data. And then so long as it does its thing and returns JSON or an array, which will get encoded as JSON, we know that that's going to get kicked out on the other side to our application. So now let's leverage webcomponents.org for that one-page application capability. So if you search on webcomponents.org, there's something called VADN Upload. And VADN Upload is this really slick drag and drop upload widget. And so I wanted to get that into Drupal because I want drag and drop upload capabilities, right? Without downloading Plupload or any permutation of Plupload and like a billion different libraries to try and accomplish this. So I take that element, and you see from the example, hey, this would let me accept PDFs or what have you. And I'm going to put that into an app, which you did. Then we're going to modify the manifest file. And in this case, if we say block is true, it's going to expose it as a block. So let's see what that looks like then. So we've got our VADN upload there. That's a single one-page app element. And I can drag and drop files, place them in there, and drop a third one. And when it's doing that, it's actually uploaded it. So let's go to the file entity system on Drupal and see, there's my 3 images that it just uploaded. So I'm going to go click to that and see, hey, my image loaded in, awesome. And the neat thing about this with that auto-loaded file is we're effectively 3 small functions away from this just being a pure PHP implementation, right? So that VADN upload, I didn't write that. We just implemented it. We put it into its own little LRN app element, which that element we can use anywhere. And then Drupal auto loads this function. And this function is basically Drupal's entity access system and file save functionality away from just being a pure PHP implementation that could work almost anywhere, right? So you can start to kind of get off the island of writing these hyper-specific Drupal integration points for things. The last thing I'll leave off on here is that this is kind of part of our mission going forward with how we're going to improve the usability of Drupal and our applications we build with Drupal. But the thing that is most painful for me with Drupal is always content authoring and content experience. And so we're trying to envision how we would go about building a system that doesn't just try to keep pace with WordPress or tries to be incrementally better. We want to be trying to compete with Website Tonight software, because I think Website Tonight software is the real threat to Drupal and open source in general. If something's too easy to use and it's cheap, then people won't care that they don't have access to the source or whatever. So this is still a prototype. I'll preface it that way, but we're starting to use components and the definitions of their API to understand how to update the components in place. And so what this is it's a prototype of something called HAX, which is short for Headless Authoring Experience. And the idea with HAX is that we can reach out and touch elements. We would know, oh, well, you have a background property. Let me use this paper background picker. Let me wire data between them. Let me update you in place via content editable. Basically, that we can modify every attribute of the thing we're trying to do just right there in place by reaching out and touching it. So if that's background color, if that's an elevation of an element to make it look like it's off the interface more, whatever it is, that we can just reach out and do it. So this is, again, still prototype phase, but we have Drupal aware of the web components. And let's say we have a view then, and then in this view that we've got, hey, kick out all the pages, and then I'd say, hey, I want you to create as panel cards. So we get, hey, panel cards. Well, if the panel card knows how to update itself, it'd be easy enough to basically have a wrapper element in Drupal that we can reach out and edit. And so this is a view of information in Drupal that I just went and put out the view. It does permissions check and says, oh yeah, you can use HAX in this case. And I can just reach out and start modifying things in the view in the place in which it's used because I have permission to. So you can see there's still from several months ago, there's still some little goofy issues there, but that actually wouldn't have to get later in the video. I just kind of skip around through other parts of it and say, hey, I'll go update this other one and start to push it to the tags in place. So this is kind of the idea of where we want to, this Drupal's destiny part, if you will, is we want to build a system where you can just reach out and start touching parts of it, right? And so in that case, there's those two things updated, but I was in a view doing it. There wasn't some special thing to accomplish it. I actually changed, those attributes of a page, or I changed, in this case, this tag field to put page 1 there by just reaching out and editing it. So relevant links to everything showed here, webcomponents.org, how your Lego bricks to start building. Drupal.org/project/webcomponents is a web components module. There's a stable release candidate release for Drupal 7. Drupal 8, it's still in development, but we're hoping to get more people involved in the project, because if we can unlock the theme layer, there's a lot of people that are kind of resisting upgrade as a result of theming specifically. So this is, could be part of a long-term strategy to stop having these painful upgrades or worry about migrations between systems, Drupal or otherwise. Polymer project is where you can learn more about the Polymer tooling that helps you build web components. It's by Google. It's a pretty cool project. And if you want to see more of the progression as we work on this in the future, drupal.pcu80/blog has me and several other developers at Penn State that are using this approach. Or if you want to learn more about ELMS Learning Network, it's elmsLn.org. And with that, I think we have opening to questions.
That was a great session, Brian. Thanks a lot. So moving on, I'm sure you all have questions. You can please type them in the chat box on your screen and we'll take them up. But before we move on to the questions, Brian, could you do a quick recap for people, joining in a little later so they can catch up a little?
Yeah, so we don't do any of our theming in Drupal's traditional theme layer. We basically do everything as its own component using this framework called Webcomponents, and Webcomponents is a standard of the browser that lets you define your own custom HTML elements. And so we do all of our design work in those custom HTML elements, and then we've got a module that kind of allows Drupal to be made aware of how to communicate to those HTML elements so that we can do things like theme Drupal or output a display mode of a node routed through one of those templates, things like that.
Awesome. So one of the questions that came in was, if somebody wants to get started into this, what is something, what are the first steps or the first few steps they should be taking?
So I would definitely recommend looking at the Polymer project site. There's a getting started link that steps through how to get Polymer installed to start working with it. So it has its own tooling. It has like a CLI command line type of a thing so that you can initialize a project. When you type Polymer init, there is a question that's asked: are you making an element? Are you making a application? Or do you want to make one of these other things? And one of the other things is a starter kit. So I would highly recommend when you're initially getting started, even just deploying the starter kit one to start looking at the way that they envision you building applications in Polymer. It shows a lot more advanced capability, such as routing, so that you can have some elements that send data to other elements to update the URL without taking you anywhere, and start to provide kind of Angular-esque functionality. So I really focus more on that and less on Drupal. Quite frankly, it'd be the best way to get started with it. And then driving the golden spike comes later as far as, okay, let's implement these via the Web Components module, or quite honestly, if you just take your HTML.tpl or Twig equivalent and you put an HTML import referencing your element file, you're going to be able to start using those elements anywhere.
Awesome. I think for now, I think these are the only questions that have come in. So probably wrapping it up early. But if you guys still have any questions, you could email them to us at webinars@srijan.in. That's webinars@srijan SRIJAN.in. So thank you, Brian. Thanks a lot. This was a great session. And if there are any questions, I'll forward them to you, and you can get back to us. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. Yeah, do you have any takeaways that we should know about?
No, just thanks for tuning in, and thanks for hosting me. You can keep up with the project and our progression with it. I tweet a lot of YouTube videos and things of what we've been working on with it on @BTOPro if you want to follow along. But thanks for having me.
All right, thank you so much. We'll catch up with you later. You guys can tune in to Srijan Wednesday webinars every other Wednesday. So looking forward to seeing you guys there. All right, thank you.